Morning to you all. Today I will start the human respiratory system, explanation of human respiratory system, and after that the exchange of O2 and CO2 in the lungs. As you know that the oxygen is carried by the hemoglobin pigment, and this hemoglobin is the important carrier of oxygen and carbon dioxide. This hemoglobin is present in our red blood cells. In my previous lecture, I told you that hemoglobin is the transporter, is the carrier of oxygen as well as carbon dioxide. In my first lecture, I told you that hemoglobin is the red pigment present in the red blood cells, and this hemoglobin binds with oxygen and moves from one part to carry this oxygen from one part to another part. And also this hemoglobin is having the quality to carry forward, to transport the carbon dioxide. In the form of oxyhemoglobin. You can see hemoglobin react with oxygen and making oxyhemoglobin. So when we look at in human respiratory system, we can explain the transport of O2 and CO2 in by two methods. Number one hemoglobin pigment which carry from one place to another place. The transport of O2 and CO2 is going to be done by the hemoglobin pigment. Got my point? On the other hand, there is another way to transport the oxygen in our body, that is diffusion process. You know, in human body, the body is large body. By the diffusion process, when it is not possible to carry the oxygen and carbon dioxide to entire part of body, the hemoglobin pigment is playing a vital role, important role to transport the oxygen from one part to another part through the blood circulatory system. In my last lecture, I told you that human respiratory system, how the track is started in human respiration from the pharynx, then larynx, then trachea, and then two bronchus, minute branch, secondary bronchus, then bronchioles, and through the alveolar duct, reaching last unit of the respiration, that is alveoli. For recapitulation, for taking you towards the respiratory system, before explaining the exchange of O2 and CO2, which is the topic for today's lecture, I would like to take you towards my previous lecture to connect the knowledge from previous lecture. Human respiratory system, and human respiratory system begins from the nostrils. Air enters through the nostrils, reaching to the pharynx, After pharynx, larynx, and then two bifurcated branch. These two branch are called bronchus and these two branches they divide further and reaching to the inner part of the lungs. These are going to divide, you can see 1, 2, 3 sub branches. And then this alveolar duct will join the alveoli. The last unit of respiratory system is alveoli. Why I am taking you back? Because refreshing your knowledge that when we start our respiratory system in my previous module, you have noticed that what are the organelles in the human respiratory system? Pharynx, then below that larynx. There is one epiglottis, I would like to tell you. Epiglottis is cusp, is a gate-like structure which closes only during the swallowing of the food. When we swallow the food, that cusp is going to close, otherwise it will remain open. So when air is reaching to the trachea, as I told you, the trachea is surrounded by cartilaginous ring. It does not allow to collapse the trachea. It's a proteinous substances, and then that air moves into the two branches. And this you can see, these are the bronchioles. After bronchus, the next are called bronchioles, and then a minute, a pipe-like structure, like a structure that is alveolar duct. At my point, this alveolar duct ends to the balloon-like structure. You can see millions number of balloons. There are huge, humongous number of balloons are present in our lungs. So these are the unit of exchange of O2 and CO2. When we start the human respiratory explanation, role of hemoglobin you must be knowing. In the blood, it binds with the O2 and CO2, and this hemoglobin is the carrier of oxygen and carbon dioxide. This is a red color pigment present in the body. You must be knowing. But today, I will take another topic. The exchange of O2 and CO2 takes place in the human respiratory system by the process of diffusion. It was the structure. But before explanation the exchange of O2 and CO2, I will tell you the diffusion through the diffusion process. How does it takes place in our body? I think all of you have drawn this, the human respiratory system, the part, it is clearly mentioned, the name of membrane is pleura. The lungs membrane is pleura, which is outer membrane. Inner to this one is the viscera. Look at this, pleura, and the inner one is viscera, and between two membranes a fluid is present inside the outer membrane. Between the outer and inner membrane, one fluid is present, and that is called pleural fluid. Okay, so this pleural fluid, which is present between these lungs membrane, you have to remember the name of membrane, pleura and viscera, which absorb, which is shock absorber, which helps in the expansion and contraction of this. The bottom part, you must remember this, where the lungs are situated, seated above this, and this is called diaphragm. D-I-A-P-H-R-A-G-M. Okay? So this was the structure of human respiratory system and lungs. Why I am going to tell you this structure again and again. When I will start the exchange of O2 and CO2 in our body, you have to remember this pathway, like number one, pharynx, then after pharynx, larynx, then bronchus, number 4, bronchioles, number 5, alveolar duct, and the last one is the unit of respiratory system, that is air sac, or you can call it alveoli. Coming to the exchange of O2 and CO2, the diffusion process. You know that the diffusion is a process in which gases or any molecules move from its higher concentration to its lower concentration without any membrane or with through any membrane. Here, before explaining the exchange process, you have to understand that the diffusion process is taking place in our human respiratory system, and that is very important. Like when we are explaining, when we are going to understand any step of the human respiratory system, the funda should be clear. Like diffusion is a process in which molecules move from its higher concentration towards its lower concentration. It's quite natural. There is no need of involvement of the hemoglobin to carry the O2 and CO2. By the diffusion process, it will take place. Right? So, it was the human respiratory system diagram. I'm sure that you have drawn this. Then the track, the path of the human respiratory system, pharynx, larynx, bronchus, bronchioles, and this alveoli. Now, before starting the exchange of O2 and CO2 in the lungs in human respiratory system, I'll tell you the percentage of oxygen in air and percentage of carbon dioxide in air. As far as the gases percentage, 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen, and 0.03% is of carbon dioxide. Now, before starting this, you should see O2 in the air, O2 in the lungs, in the body. O2 in the air, 21%, and you will be surprised to know when it enters in our lungs, when it reaches to the RBC, when it reaches to the tissues, the percentage will be less, and this oxygen percentage will not be 21, it will be little bit less, it will be decreased, and there would be 16%. Got my point? Now look at this. In air it is 21, and in the body, when it is consumed, it is used, it is 16. So it is quite easy to understand that automatically the oxygen will move from outside to inside the body. By this diffusion process, look at this indication. On the other hand, CO2 in air, 0.03, right? But CO2 in the tissue, in the body, in the tissues, is 4%. So it will automatically move from inside to outside. Now look at this arrow. So when I am going to explain the inflow of the oxygen and outward movement of the CO2, you should see what is the real percentage of oxygen and carbon dioxide outside the body and inside the body. Now, reaching to the diffusion process or exchange of O2 and CO2 process in the human respiratory system. I can erase this. I am sure that you have drawn this, you have mentioned in your notes that what is the percentage of oxygen and carbon dioxide in air and in body. Now, through one explanatory diagram and chart, you can easily understand lungs, RBC and tissues. Got this? Now, as you know that in the lungs, through the pulmonary artery, through the heart, the pulmonary artery are bringing the impure deoxygenated blood, and then pulmonary vein is taking oxygenated. In the human circulatory system it is there. But here you have to understand how does oxygen enters through the lungs, then it reaches to the alveoli, and then from alveoli RBC, red blood cells, which is present in this, it is entering to the blood cells, and then it is reaching to this process. So oxygen is coming to the lungs region, then it is reaching to the RBC, and then it is reaching to the tissues. But here you will see O2 percentage is 21, and then O2 percentage is 16. Because of this difference in the concentration, 21, it is moving to the, through this difference, because of this difference, it is moving to the lungs, then after lungs, it is reaching to the red blood cells, and then it is reaching to the tissue. And what will happen? The percentage of O2 is going to decrease, reaching to the 16% from 21 to 16, and then this, on the other hand, what will happen? That when the percentage of CO2, you see the O2 is going to convert into the CO2, and the opposite to this, CO2 will be produced, and this CO2 percentage is 4%. Generally, you have noticed that the percentage of CO2 in the air it is below to 1, below than 1, and this CO2 percentage is 4% inside body. When we are going, as you know that every cell carry both O2 and CO2. As I told you, through the hemoglobin, when these are going to be transported from one region to another region, hemoglobin also showing the tendency to bind the oxygen, also showing the tendency to bind the carbon dioxide. Oxyhemoglobin is produced, then carboxyhemoglobin is produced. So when these oxygen is converted into CO2, the story start reverse movement of this CO2 from tissue to the cells, and then from cell it is again reaching back to the our respiratory tract. And you know that in the respiration process this CO2 is given out. Got my point? So this was the exchange of O2 and CO2 taking place in our body. In the exchange, you have to see the transport of the O2 and CO2 through the different part of our human respiratory system, like through the nostrils. Moving through the nostrils is very beneficial than taking air through the mouth, because through the nostrils two processes will be done. The nostril hair will trap the dust particle, the mucus is present in the nostrils, that will also moisten the air. It will maintain the temperature neither too much high nor too much low. So breathing through nostrils is better than the breathing through the mouth. When it is reaching to the passing through the trachea and then reaching to the lungs, in the lungs you have to see that in the lungs when it reaches to the alveoli, it will reach to the blood, and that is why it is cellular catabolic process. When I have taken the first lecture, why the respiration is called cellular metabolic process, because in the respiration the breaking of glucose is done. Complete oxidation of cellular respiration takes place here. Glucose breaks into a smaller particle. That is why the cellular respiration is called catabolism. It is opposite. You should recall your previous knowledge that the cellular respiration is catabolic process. And opposite to the catabolic, again I am going to tell you that photosynthesis is the first topic. The photosynthesis is anabolic, because in the photosynthesis a bigger molecules, glucose is produced, and that is why that is called anabolic. And the catabolic, one bigger molecule is going to broken down into the smaller molecules. So this respiration is cellular respiration is internal process. Here the catabolic process takes place, both the cata and anabolic process combining and making the metabolism. This process, entire process is called the metabolism, which is made up of two sub-process. One is catabolic process, breaking process, and one is anabolic process, in which the bigger molecules is produced. Now, I think it is clear in your mind. To understand this, again you can write through this explanatory chart, through this diagram, you can complete the explanation of this exchange of O2 and CO2 taking place. So in these three modules you can easily complete. In the first module I told you the difference between aerobic and anaerobic process, difference between breathing and respiration process, and in the second I told you the human respiratory system. The diagram of human respiratory is very important, because in exam there could be questions related with the diagram, that you have to draw the structure, you have to label the different parts of the human respiratory system, and after that when you start the gaseous exchange, of O2 and CO2, in this explanation you can give this structure, and then you can easily explain your contents through this. How does the O2 is taken in, how does this CO2 is taken out? It is by the diffusion process. As I told you, the diffusion process is very important to transport the O2 and CO2 from one region to another region. Why does this takes place? Because of the difference in the concentration of O2 at one place and difference of percentage of O2 at inner side. You should easily explain that O2 is moving from outside to inside and CO2 is moving from inside to outside. Now it is very important to draw the structure and then go for the explanation. Now before closing this, I would like to give you some important question for your complete study. I'll give you some important questions for this module, that how you can complete this human respiratory system with the help of fill in the blanks, with the help of MCQ, with the help of reasoning and assertion. Okay, you can complete this entire human respiratory system through these questions. First is the name of pigment. You can write present in RBCS. Okay. Which pigment is present in the red blood cells? What is the structure of, what is the role of that pigment? Means the role of pigment present in the RBC. As I told you that it carry the O2 and CO2. Which component is formed? Oxyhemoglobin when it joined with the oxygen, and another one is carboxyhemoglobin. When this pigment hemoglobin joined with the carbon dioxide, the carboxyhemoglobin is transported. After this, there will be question that what process takes place. Name the process by which O2 and CO2 is transported. Name the process by which O2 and CO2 is transported, that is diffusion process. It moves passively from one region, one higher region to another lower region, that is a diffusion process. And the explain the process of explain the exchange of O2 and CO2. Explain the exchange of in the lungs. Okay, so you have to write the question and answers. With the help of diagram, you will also complete the 3 diagrams in your fair notebook for the human respiratory system. It means this explanation diagram, and before that you have to see the structure of alveoli, and before that the first one is human respiratory system. So when you start, there would be multiple choice question, reasoning and assertion type question. You can add more and more question in your notes, and you have to see the assignment question. You can write some more question which is explained by me, why, what, where, when, why, and how does it happen. So the exchange explanation, this is the longer, this is a long answer type question. They explain the O2 and CO2 process, explain the human respiratory system, entire human respiratory system you have to explain. Role of hemoglobin, role of cartilaginous ring. You can also add one more question. Role of cartilaginous rings in trachea. Okay? It does not allow to collapse the trachea. Our windpipe don't collapse because of the presence of this cartilaginous rings, which is covering the entire cartilaginous entire windpipe, or you can call it the larynx. The role of epiglottis, I already told you that the epiglottis closes during the swallowing, It does not allow any grain particles to enter into the trachea, into the windpipe. Otherwise, it could be very, very fatal. So, binding this by these questions, I will be meeting you with my next module, with my next lecture. Thank you.